Marcus Chen woke up every morning at 5 o'clock, and the first thing he did was look at the photo on his bedside table where his father stood in front of a small grocery store in Taiwan holding a broom and smiling like he owned the whole world. Even though he barely had enough money to feed his family, that photo reminded Marcus of where he came from, and it reminded him that everything he had built with his own hands could disappear in a single moment, just like his father's little store had disappeared when a fire burned it to the ground and left his family with nothing but ashes and memories. Marcus was not born rich, and he was not born with connections or fancy degrees from expensive universities, and he did not have anyone to open doors for him when he first arrived in Chicago as a young man with exactly $400 in his pocket and a dream that felt bigger than the entire city. His mother had worked 3 jobs to send him to America, and she had told him on the day he left Taiwan that he must never forget where he came from, and he must never become the kind of man who steps on others to climb higher, and he must always remember that true success is measured not by how much money you have, but by how many people you lift up along the way. Marcus carried those words with him through every difficult day and every sleepless night and every moment. When he wanted to give up and go back home and admit that the American dream was just a beautiful lie told to people who did not know any better, he started working at a textile warehouse on the south side of Chicago, where the pay was bad and the hours were long, and the boss was a mean old man who yelled at workers for taking bathroom breaks, and who fired people without warning whenever he was in a bad mood. But Marcus did not complain, and he did not cause trouble, and he showed up early and stayed late and learned everything he could about how the business worked, from the trucks that delivered the fabric to the customers who bought it to the paperwork that kept everything running smooth. After 3 years, the old boss died of a heart attack, and his children, who lived in Florida and never visited, decided to sell the warehouse because they did not want to deal with the headaches of running a business. They did not understand. Marcus saw his chance, and he took it, even though it scared him more than anything had ever scared him before, and he went to the bank and asked for a loan, and they laughed at him and told him to come back when he had something real to offer as collateral. So Marcus went to his mother, who had saved every penny she earned from cleaning houses and washing dishes, and she gave him the deed to her small house and told him that she believed in him more than she believed in anything else in this world, and that he must use this gift wisely. With his mother's house as collateral, Marcus got the loan, and he bought the warehouse for a price that was probably too high. But he did not care, because he finally had something that belonged to him, and he was going to make it work no matter what it cost him. The first year was brutal, and Marcus lost 15 pounds because he often forgot to eat, and he slept on a cot in the back office because he could not afford an apartment, and he did everything himself, from answering phones to loading trucks to negotiating with suppliers who wanted to charge him twice what they charged bigger companies. But slowly things began to change, and word spread that Chin Logistics was a company that delivered on time every time, and that Marcus Chen was a man who kept his promises, even when keeping those promises meant driving through snowstorms at 3 in the morning to make sure a customer got their shipment. It was during this difficult time that Marcus met the 2 men who would become his partners, and who would eventually try to destroy everything he had built. Vincent Morano was a smooth talker with an expensive suit and a smile that made people trust him, even when they should not, and he approached Marcus at a business conference and told him that he saw great potential in Chen Logistics and that he wanted to invest money and help the company grow. Marcus was suspicious at first because nobody had ever offered to help him before, and because Vincent seemed too polished and too confident and too eager to get involved in a small warehouse business that was barely breaking even. But Vincent was persistent, and he kept coming back with new ideas and new offers, and eventually he wore Marcus down and convinced him that together they could build something much bigger than either of them could build alone. Derek Hawley came along a few months later, and he was different from Vincent because he was quiet and serious, and he seemed like the kind of man who thought carefully before he spoke and who did not make promises he could not keep. Derek had experience in finance, and he offered to handle the books and the banking relationships and all the complicated paperwork that Marcus hated dealing with, because numbers had never been his strength and because he preferred to focus on the parts of the business that involved actually moving things from one place to another. Together, the three of them made a good team, or at least that is what Marcus believed for a very long time, and the company grew faster than anyone expected, and within 5 years, they had 20 trucks instead of 2, and they had 50 employees instead of 5, and they had customers all over the Midwest who depended on them. Marcus brought his mother to Chicago and bought her a nice house in a quiet neighborhood, and she cried when she saw it because she had never lived anywhere so beautiful, and she told Marcus that his father would be so proud if he could see what his son had accomplished. By the 10th year, Chum Logistics was worth $50 million, and by the 15th year, it was worth $200 million, and Marcus Chen was no longer a poor immigrant working out of a rundown warehouse, but a successful businessman who was invited to fancy dinners and asked to give speeches and featured in magazine articles about the American dream. He trusted Vincent and Derek completely because they had been with him through the hard times, and because they had helped him build something amazing, and because he could not imagine that anyone who had shared so much struggle and so much success could ever want to hurt him. But Marcus did not know that while he was busy running the company and taking care of customers and planning for the future, his two partners were meeting secretly and making plans that would tear his world apart. He did not know that Vincent had been stealing money for years and hiding it in accounts that Marcus had never heard of, and he did not know that Derek had been helping Vincent cover the tracks and cook the books and create a paper trail that would make Marcus look like the criminal instead of the victim. He did not know that the men he called his brothers were about to declare war on him, and that they expected him to fall quickly and quietly and disappear into shame and poverty while they took everything he had worked so hard to create. Marcus Chun did not know any of this as he sat in his office one evening looking at the photo of his father and feeling grateful for how far he had come and looking forward to many more years of building and growing and succeeding. He did not know that tomorrow morning everything would change and that the quiet before the storm was about to end. The morning started like any other morning, and Marcus drove to work, listening to the same radio station he always listened to and drinking coffee from the same travel mug his daughter had given him for his birthday, and thinking about the meeting he had scheduled with a potential new customer who could bring millions of dollars of new business to the company. He pulled into the parking lot at 7:30, just like he did every day, and he noticed that something felt different, but he could not say exactly what it was, and he told himself he was being paranoid and that everything was fine. But everything was not fine, and Marcus realized this the moment he walked toward the main entrance and saw two security guards he did not recognize standing in front of the doors with their arms crossed and their faces showing no emotion. Marcus smiled at them because he smiled at everyone, and he reached for the door handle, but one of the guards stepped forward and blocked his path and said that he was sorry, but Mr. Chun was not allowed to enter the building. Marcus laughed because he thought it was some kind of joke, and he said that there must be a mistake because this was his building and his company, and he had been coming here every day for 15 years, and nobody had ever stopped him at the door before. The guard did not laugh, and he did not smile, and he handed Marcus an envelope and said that everything was explained inside and that Mr. Chun needed to leave the property immediately or the police would be called. Marcus opened the envelope with shaking hands, and inside he found legal documents filled with words he did not fully understand, but he understood enough to know that his world was falling apart. Right there in the parking lot of the company he had built from nothing. The documents said that Vincent Morano and Derek Hawley had filed an emergency motion with the court, claiming that Marcus Chun had stolen money from the company and that he had violated his duties as a partner and that he was a danger to the business and needed to be removed immediately. Marcus read the words over and over again, but they did not make sense because he had never stolen anything in his life, and he had given everything he had to this company, and he could not understand how anyone could accuse him of such terrible things. He tried to call Vincent, but the call went straight to voicemail. And he tried to call Derek, but the same thing happened, and he stood there in the parking lot feeling like the ground was opening up beneath his feet, and like he was falling into a darkness he could not escape. A few employees walked past him on their way into the building, and some of them looked at him with pity, and some of them looked away quickly, as if they were afraid to make eye contact, and Marcus realized that everyone already knew what was happening and that nobody had warned him. He drove home in a daze, and when he walked through the door, his wife, Lisa, took one look at his face and knew immediately that something terrible had happened, and she held him while he told her everything, and she did not cry, and she did not panic, and she just held him tighter and told him that they would figure this out together. The next few hours were a nightmare of phone calls and legal documents and terrible news that kept getting worse with every passing minute. Marcus learned that his bank accounts had been frozen and that he could not access any of the money he had earned over 15 years of hard work, and that Vincent and Derek had convinced the judge that he was a flight risk who might try to escape the country with stolen funds. He learned that the accusations against him included not just embezzlement but also fraud and breach of fiduciary duty and half a dozen other crimes he had never even heard of, and that if the charges stuck, he could go to prison for 20 years or more. He learned that Vincent and Derek had been planning this attack for months, and that they had gathered documents and testimony and built a case against him piece by piece while he was busy running the company and trusting them completely. The local newspaper ran a story that evening with the headline, "Chun Logistics Founder Accused of Massive Fraud," and the story was full of quotes from anonymous sources who said that Marcus Chun had always seemed too good to be true, and that nobody was surprised to learn he was a criminal. Marcus read the article and felt sick to his stomach because the reporter had not contacted him for comment and had not tried to verify any of the accusations and had simply printed whatever Vincent and Derek had told them as if it were proven fact. His phone started ringing with calls from friends and business contacts who had seen the story, and some of them offered support, but most of them just wanted to know if the accusations were true, and Marcus could hear the doubt in their voices even when they said they believed him. His daughter Emily came home from school in tears because other students had been talking about the story, and some of them had said cruel things about her father, and she did not understand how people could be so mean. When they did not know the truth, Marcus held his daughter and promised her that he had done nothing wrong and that the truth would come out eventually. But even as he said the words, he was not sure if he believed them because he knew how the world worked, and he knew that once people decided you were guilty, it was almost impossible to change their minds. The lawyer Marcus hired was a tired-looking man who charged $500 an hour and who told Marcus that the case against him was serious and that fighting back would be expensive and difficult, and that there were no guarantees of success. Marcus asked the lawyer how this could happen, and how two men could steal a company from its founder with nothing but lies and false documents, and the lawyer shrugged and said that it happened more often than people realized, and that the legal system was not designed to find truth, but to determine who had the better arguments and the more convincing evidence over the next few weeks. Marcus watched helplessly as his reputation was destroyed piece by piece, and as people he had known for years stopped returning his calls, and as the company he had built was taken over completely by the men who had betrayed him. Vincent gave interviews to business magazines talking about how he had suspected Marcus of wrongdoing for years, and how difficult it had been to finally take action against a man he had once considered a friend, and he played the role of the reluctant hero so perfectly that even Marcus almost believed him. Derek stayed quiet and let Vincent do all the talking, but Marcus could see from the company announcements that Derek was now in charge of all financial decisions and that he was quickly moving money around in ways that made no sense unless you understood that he was covering his tracks and preparing to steal even more. The worst moment came when Marcus received a letter from his mother asking what was happening and saying that she had seen the news stories and that she was worried about him and that she still believed in him no matter what anyone said. Marcus sat at the kitchen table and cried because his mother had sacrificed everything to give him a chance at success, and now her son was being called a criminal and a thief, and there was nothing he could do to protect her from the shame and the pain. Lisa found him there and sat beside him and took his hand and said that they would get through this together, and that the truth was on their side, and that eventually justice would be served, even if it took years. Marcus wanted to believe her, but he felt like he was drowning, and like no matter how hard he kicked and struggled, he could not reach the surface. And he wondered if Vincent and Derek had already won, and if he should just give up and accept defeat. But then he looked at the photo of his father that he had brought from his office, and he remembered the words his mother had spoken so many years ago about never stepping on others and always lifting people up, and he realized that if he gave up now, he would be betraying everything his parents had taught him. So, Marcus made a decision in that moment, sitting at the kitchen table with tears on his face and his wife holding his hand and his whole world falling apart around him. He decided that he would not go quietly, and he would not accept the lies, and he would fight back with everything he had, even if it cost him everything, and even if it took the rest of his life. Vincent and Derek wanted war, and Marcus was going to give them exactly what they wanted. The months that followed were the darkest of Marcus Chun's life, and there were nights when he lay awake staring at the ceiling wondering if the sun would ever rise again and if he would ever feel like himself again. The money ran out faster than he expected because lawyers were expensive, and living was expensive, and everything cost more when you were fighting for your survival against people who had millions of dollars and no conscience. Marcus and Lisa sold the beautiful house they had lived in for 10 years and moved into a small apartment on the west side of the city where the walls were thin and the neighbors were loud and the view from the window was nothing but concrete and gray sky. They sold the cars and the furniture and the jewelry that Marcus had given Lisa over the years, and every sale felt like losing another piece of the life they had built together, and every check they received went straight to the lawyers, who always needed more. Marcus tried to find work, but nobody would hire him because his name was now connected to scandal and fraud, and every employer who looked him up online found dozens of articles about the accusations, and nobody wanted to take a chance on a man who might be a criminal. He applied for jobs that were far below his experience and qualifications, and he was rejected again and again, and he could see in the eyes of the hiring managers that they had already decided he was guilty before he even walked through the door. His old friends disappeared one by one, and people who had once been proud to know Marcus Chun now pretended they had never met him, and invitations to dinners and events stopped coming, and the phone stopped ringing, and the silence was louder than any noise. Some people were cruel and sent Marcus messages telling him that he deserved everything that was happening to him, and that immigrants like him should go back where they came from, and that America did not need people who came here just to steal and cheat. Some people were simply absent, and Marcus understood that they were protecting themselves and their own reputations, and that nobody wanted to be associated with a man who might go to prison, and he tried not to blame them, but the loneliness was crushing. Lisa never wavered, and she held the family together with strength that Marcus did not know she had, and she found a job as a receptionist at a medical clinic, and she worked long hours for low pay, and she never complained. Even when she came home, exhausted and fell asleep before dinner, Emily struggled at school, because teenagers can be cruel, and because her father's shame became her shame in the eyes of her classmates, and she stopped bringing friends home, and she stopped talking about her day, and she spent more and more time alone in her room. Marcus watched his daughter suffer and felt like a failure because a father is supposed to protect his children, and he could not protect Emily from the whispers and the stares and the casual cruelty of people who did not know the truth. He started having trouble sleeping, and when he did sleep, he had nightmares about prison cells and courtrooms and Vincent Morano laughing at him while Derek Hawley counted stacks of money that should have belonged to Marcus. He lost weight because food had no taste and eating felt pointless, and his clothes hung loose on his body. And when he looked in the mirror, he saw a stranger staring back at him with empty eyes and hollow cheeks. There were moments when Marcus thought about giving up and just ending the fight and accepting whatever fate Vincent and Derek had planned for him, and disappearing into obscurity and shame and letting the world forget that he had ever existed. One night he sat alone in the dark living room while Lisa and Emily slept, and he thought about all the ways a man could escape from pain, and he scared himself with how seriously he considered options that would have been unthinkable just months before. But then he remembered his father standing in front of that little grocery store with a broom in his hand and a smile on his face, and he remembered that his father had lost everything in a fire and had rebuilt his life from nothing, and had never given up, even when giving up would have been the easy choice. And he remembered his mother working 3 jobs to send him to America and believing in him when nobody else did, and sacrificing her own house to help him buy that warehouse, and he knew that he could not betray her faith in him by surrendering to despair. So, Marcus got up from the couch and turned on the light and made himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table with a notebook and a pen and started writing down everything he knew about Vincent and Derek and the company they had stolen from him. He wrote down every meeting he could remember, and every conversation, and every decision, and every moment when something had seemed not quite right, but he had ignored his instincts because he trusted his partners. He wrote down names of employees who might be willing to tell the truth, and names of customers who had dealt with Vincent and Derek directly, and names of vendors who might have information about how the company really operated. He filled page after page with notes and questions and ideas, and by the time the sun came up, he had the beginnings of a plan, and for the first time in months, he felt something other than despair. Marcus knew he could not win this fight alone, and he knew that the legal system was stacked against him, and he knew that Vincent and Derek had more money and more power and more connections than he would ever have. But he also knew something that his enemies did not understand, and that was that a man who has nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind of opponent, because he will not stop and he will not give up, and he will keep fighting until he wins or until there is nothing left of him. The next morning, Marcus made 2 decisions that would change everything. First, he decided to find a forensic accountant who could dig through the company's financial records and find the evidence that would prove his innocence and expose the real criminals. Second, he decided to stop playing defense and start playing offense, and to make Vincent and Derek understand that they had made a terrible mistake. When they decided to destroy him, they wanted war, and Marcus was finally ready to give them one. He called his lawyer and said that he was done waiting and done hoping and done trusting the system to find the truth. And he said that from now on they were going to attack, and they were going to be relentless, and they were not going to stop until Vincent and Derek were the ones facing prison. The liar warned him that this approach would be expensive and risky, and that there was no guarantee of success, and Marcus laughed for the first time in months and said that he had already lost everything, so what more could they possibly take from him? Lisa came into the kitchen and saw the light in her husband's eyes and the determination on his face, and she smiled because she recognized the man she had married. and the man she had believed in, even when he had stopped believing in himself. She sat down beside him and took his hand and asked what had changed, and Marcus showed her the notebook full of notes and told her that he was done being a victim and that it was time to fight back. Lisa nodded and said that she had been waiting for this moment, and that she knew he would find his way back and that she would be beside him every step of the way no matter what happened. Marcus looked at his wife and felt tears in his eyes and felt grateful beyond words for this woman who had never doubted him and who had held the family together when he was falling apart. He promised her that he would make things right and that he would restore their good name and that he would make Vincent and Derek pay for every lie they had told and every dollar they had stolen and every moment of suffering they had caused. The war was about to begin, and Marcus Chun was finally ready to fight. Marcus Chun found Priya Sharma through a friend of a friend who worked in the legal world and who told him that if anyone could untangle a financial fraud, it was this woman who had earned the nickname, the archaeologist, because of her ability to dig through layers of deception and find the truth buried underneath. Priya was a small woman with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and when Marcus first met her in her cluttered office downtown, she did not smile or offer pleasantries, but simply asked him to tell her everything from the beginning. So Marcus told her the whole story, starting with the warehouse and his mother's house and the early years of struggle and the arrival of Vincent and Derek and the growth of the company and the betrayal that had destroyed his life. Priya listened without interrupting, and she took notes on a yellow legal pad, and when Marcus finished, she was quiet for a long moment, and then she looked at him with those sharp eyes and asked him one question. She asked him if he was prepared for what she might find, because in her experience, financial investigations rarely went the way people expected, and sometimes the truth was more complicated than anyone imagined. Marcus said that he was prepared for anything and that he just wanted to know the truth, whatever it was, and that he would rather know he was guilty and face the consequences than spend the rest of his life wondering. Priya nodded and said that she would take the case and that her fee was expensive, but that she would work on a payment plan because she had a good feeling about Marcus and because she had seen too many honest men destroyed by liars and cheaters. Over the next 3 months, Priya Sharma worked like a woman possessed, and she obtained financial records through legal discovery, and she analyzed bank statements and invoices and contracts, and she built spreadsheets that covered entire walls of her office. Marcus visited her every week to check on progress, and each time he came, she seemed more excited and more determined. And she told him that she was finding things that did not make sense and that the numbers were telling a story very different from the one Vincent and Derek had presented to the court. She found shell corporations registered in Delaware that Marcus had never heard of, and that were owned by people whose names he did not recognize, but who turned out to be relatives and friends of Vincent and Derek. She found invoices for services that were never performed and products that were never delivered, and the money from these fake transactions flowed into the shell corporations and then disappeared into bank accounts overseas. She found that Vincent had been taking money out of the company for at least 5 years, and that the amounts had started small but had grown larger and larger as his confidence increased and as he realized that nobody was watching. She found that Derek had been helping to cover up the theft by manipulating the accounting records and creating false documents and forging signatures, including signatures that were supposed to be from Marcus. But the most important thing Priya found was an email chain between Vincent and Derek that had been hidden in a backup server that they thought had been deleted and destroyed. The email chain started with Derek writing to Vincent about concerns that Marcus was asking too many questions about certain expenses, and Vincent replied that they needed to move faster with their plan because Chen was getting suspicious. Then Vincent wrote the words that would eventually send him to prison, and he wrote that once Chen was gone they would split everything, and that Chen had built the company, but they would take it, and that was how the game worked. Derek replied that he was nervous about the plan and that maybe they should reconsider, and Vincent responded with contempt and said that Derek was weak and that if he wanted his share of the money, he needed to stop worrying and start helping. There were more emails discussing the false evidence they would plant, and the employees they would bribe, and the lawyers they would hire, and the story they would tell to the newspapers and the court. Marcus read the emails in Priya's office, and his hands were shaking, and there were tears running down his face, because he finally had proof that he was innocent and that his partners had deliberately destroyed his life. For money, Priya put a hand on his shoulder and told him that this was just the beginning, and that they had enough evidence to not only clear his name but to send Vincent and Derek to prison for a very long time. But she warned him that the legal process would be slow, and that Vincent and Derek would fight back with everything they had, and that they would try to discredit the evidence and attack Priya's methods and make Marcus look like the real criminal. Marcus said that he did not care how long it took, and that he did not care how hard they fought back, and that he would not stop until justice was served, and until the whole world knew the truth about what Vincent and Derek had done. He went home that night and told Lisa everything, and showed her copies of the emails, and she read them with growing anger, and then she looked at her husband and said that she had always known he was innocent, and that now everyone else would know it too. Emily came into the room and asked what was happening, and Marcus told her that they had found proof that he had done nothing wrong, and that the men who had accused him were the real criminals. Emily started crying, and she hugged her father and said that she had never doubted him, and that she was so sorry for all the time she had felt ashamed, and that she should have been stronger and believed in him more. Marcus held his daughter and told her that she had nothing to apologize for, and that the shame belonged only to Vincent and Derek, and that soon everyone would know the truth over the next few weeks. Marcus and his lawyers prepared their counterattack, and they organized the evidence Priya had gathered, and they wrote legal briefs that laid out the case in clear and simple terms. They contacted the FBI and presented the evidence of wire fraud and embezzlement, and the federal agents were skeptical at first because they had read the news stories about Marcus Chun, the criminal, but then they looked at the evidence, and their skepticism turned to interest, and then to determination. The FBI opened an investigation into Vincent Morano and Derek Holly, and subpoenas were issued for financial records and emails and testimony, and suddenly the two men who had been so confident and so powerful were facing the full weight of the federal government. Marcus also reached out to a journalist at the Chicago Tribune named Sarah Mitchell, who had written one of the original stories about the scandal and who had believed the lies that Vincent and Derek had told her. He met with Sarah in a coffee shop, and he brought Priya with him, and they showed Sarah the evidence and explained what had really happened, and watched as her face changed from skepticism to shock to anger. Sarah was a good journalist who cared about the truth, and she was furious that she had been used to spread lies and destroy an innocent man's reputation, and she promised Marcus that she would make it right. She told him that she would write a new story that told the real story, and that she would make sure everyone knew that Marcus Chen was the victim, not the criminal, and that Vincent Morano and Derek Holly were thieves and liars. Marcus thanked her and said that he just wanted the truth to come out, and that he did not want revenge or fame or anything else except his good name back. But deep inside he knew that was not entirely true, and he knew that he wanted Vincent and Derek to suffer the way he had suffered, and he wanted them to lose everything the way he had lost everything. He wanted war, and now he had the weapons to win it. The story hit the front page of the Chicago Tribune on a Sunday morning, and the headline read, "The Hostile Takeover That Backfired." Inside the Chen logistics fraud, and underneath the headline, was a photo of Marcus Chen standing in front of the warehouse where his journey had begun so many years ago. Sarah Mitchell had done her job well, and the article was thorough and devastating, and it laid out all the evidence that Priya Sharma had gathered, and it quoted sources inside the company who confirmed that Vincent and Derek had been stealing money for years. The article included excerpts from the email chain where Vincent wrote about how they would take everything from Marcus, and it included details about the shell corporations and the fake invoices and the forged signatures. Most importantly, the article made clear that Marcus Chen had been framed and that every accusation against him was a lie designed to cover up the real crimes committed by his partners. Marcus woke up that morning to the sound of his phone buzzing with notifications, and at first he was afraid because phones buzzing had come to mean bad news and more attacks and more pain. But then he looked at the messages and saw that people were sending him support and congratulations and apologies, and that the tide was finally turning in his favor. Old friends who had disappeared reached out to say they were sorry for doubting him, and that they should have known better, and that they hoped he could forgive them for their weakness. Business contacts who had refused to take his calls suddenly wanted to meet with him and talk about opportunities and partnerships, and they acted like the last year had never happened. Even strangers sent messages of support and told Marcus that they had always thought the accusations seemed wrong, and that they were glad the truth had finally come out. The most satisfying response came from the offices of Chun Logistics, where Vincent and Derek were scrambling to contain the damage from the article. Marcus heard from sources inside the company that Vincent had screamed at his lawyers for an hour after reading the Tribune story, and that Derek had locked himself in his office and refused to come out, and that employees were whispering in the hallways about what would happen next. The company's largest customer, a Fortune 500 retailer that shipped millions of dollars of products through Chen Logistics every year, issued a statement saying they were reviewing the relationship and that they took the allegations of fraud very seriously. Other customers followed with similar statements, and within a week, the company had lost contracts worth tens of millions of dollars, and the stock price had dropped by 40%, and investors were demanding answers. Vincent tried to fight back with his own public relations campaign, and he gave interviews to business magazines where he claimed that the Tribune story was full of lies, and that Marcus Chen was a bitter man who would say anything to get revenge. But nobody believed him anymore because the evidence was too strong, and because Priya Sharma had done her job too well, and because the FBI investigation was now public knowledge. The federal investigation moved faster than anyone expected, and subpoenas went out to dozens of people connected to Chen Logistics and to the shell corporations and to the banks that had handled the stolen money. FBI agents showed up at the homes of Vincent's relatives and friends who were listed as owners of the shell corporations, and they asked questions that made it clear they knew exactly what had happened and exactly who was responsible. Derek Haley was the first crack, and Marcus heard that he had hired his own lawyer separate from Vincent and that he was cooperating with the FBI in exchange for a lighter sentence. Derek had always been the weaker of the two partners, and Marcus knew that Vincent had bullied him and intimidated him, and that Derek had gone along with the scheme more out of fear than greed. That did not make Derek innocent, and Marcus still wanted him to face justice, but he understood that Derek's cooperation would make the case against Vincent even stronger. The FBI obtained phone records that showed hundreds of calls between Vincent and Derek during the months leading up to the attack on Marcus, and the content of those calls became clear when Derek started talking to prosecutors. He told them everything about how Vincent had come up with the plan and how they had gathered fake evidence and bribed employees and manipulated the accounting records to make Marcus look guilty. He told them about the offshore bank accounts where Vincent had hidden millions of dollars, and about the real estate purchases and the luxury cars and the expensive vacations that had all been paid for with stolen money. He told them about Vincent's contempt for Marcus and how Vincent had always resented the fact that Marcus was the one who had built the company and the one who got the credit and the one whose name was on the door. Vincent Morano watched his empire crumble, and there was nothing he could do to stop it, and every day brought new bad news and new defections and new evidence that made his situation more hopeless. He tried to flee the country, but the FBI had anticipated this, and they had placed him on a no-fly list. And when he showed up at O'Hare Airport with a one-way ticket to Brazil, he was stopped by federal agents and told that he could not leave. He tried to hide money in accounts that the FBI did not know about, but Priya Sharma had found them all, and the court had frozen every asset that Vincent touched. He tried to turn other employees against Marcus, but the employees had seen which way the wind was blowing, and nobody wanted to go down with a sinking ship. Marcus filed a civil lawsuit against Vincent and Derek, seeking damages for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty and intentional infliction of emotional distress, and a dozen other claims that added up to hundreds of millions of dollars. The lawsuit detailed every lie and every theft, and every act of betrayal, and it painted a picture of two greedy men who had destroyed an innocent person for money, and who had done it with calculation and cruelty. Marcus also filed a motion to restore his ownership stake in the company, and to reverse all the actions that had been taken against him, and the court granted the motion, and suddenly Marcus was back in control of the company he had built. He walked into the headquarters of Chun Logistics for the first time in over a year, and the security guards who had once blocked his entrance now opened the doors for him and welcomed him back. Employees who had been afraid to speak up when he was under attack now came to him with tears in their eyes and told him how sorry they were and how glad they were that he was back. Marcus thanked them and told them that he did not blame them for being afraid, and that he understood the pressure they had been under, and that what mattered now was moving forward together. He called a company-wide meeting and stood in front of hundreds of employees and told them that the nightmare was over and that the criminals who had tried to steal their company would face justice. He promised that he would rebuild what had been damaged and that he would restore the company's reputation, and that Chun Logistics would be stronger than ever before. The employees cheered and applauded, and Marcus felt something he had not felt in a very long time, and that was hope. But he knew that the fight was not over, and that Vincent and Derek still had to face trial, and that the legal process would take months or even years. He also knew that winning in court was not enough, and that he needed to make sure that everyone understood the truth, and that his name was cleared completely and permanently. So he continued to work with Sarah Mitchell and other journalists, and he gave interviews and made public appearances and told his story to anyone who would listen. He wanted the whole world to know what Vincent and Derek had done, and he wanted everyone to understand that justice was possible, even when powerful people tried to crush ordinary people. And he wanted Vincent and Derek to watch from their lawyers' offices and their empty mansions as everything they had stolen was taken back, and everything they had built on lies was reduced to nothing. They had wanted war, and Marcus was giving them exactly what they deserved.